Hello, hello, bienvenue, welcome back. Today let's talk about the latest YA to hit the screen, Shadow and Bone. Now, I haven't read the books, but several of my friends and several of my viewers have actually said that I should really read the Six of Crows duology, which is a sequel to the Shadow and Bone series, which is all part of the Grishaverse, or something like that. I actually had to look up what it was called because I honestly didn't know. But I thought this presented a very unique opportunity for me. It allows me to go in and look at the adaptation as it stands on its own, and this is without any prior knowledge to the already written world. So I'm judging Shadow and Bone strictly on it being a fantasy adventure show. Let's do a quick spoiler-free summary. You have two kinds of people in this fantasy world. People who can wield magical abilities to manipulate energy and matter, like fire, wind, or fabricate, or heal. These are Grisha. And then you have everyday, ordinary humans, just living their lives and doing their best, or worst in some cases. You have many different countries, many different ethnicities, some at war and some that hold tentative peace. But the country of Ravka, who is at war with the Shu-Han, is divided by the Shadowfold, a literal wall of shadows that houses monsters that will devour you when you try to cross. But it wasn't always like that. It's the Black Heretic that created the Fold, a shadow summoner. And the people of Ravka and the world wait for the Sun Summoner, someone who is destined to destroy the Shadowfold to appear. And obviously, that's exactly who our main protagonist, Alina Starkov, turns out to be. We have 8 episodes, and we are thrown straight into it. The first episode is by far the slowest. I mean, it's trying to set up so much. But this series is relatively short. It doesn't try to draw out the story, so it doesn't have that bloated and overextended feel that a lot of TV and some movies definitely have these days. This adventure is very episodic. It's suited very well to the format television. A movie just wouldn't have done this universe justice. It's a lot of world building, it's a lot of mythology and the history, and it does it at a very quick pace. So it's heists and magic and comedy and romance. And that might be part of the problem. If you have no prior knowledge whatsoever of this series, you have a lot of information being thrown at you all at once. Honestly, you don't really understand the world and all the little intricacies until at least halfway through the season. We have so many ongoing stories happening all at once, so many different characters. Some that you have time to like, and some that you just don't. Some storylines don't even intersect until the very last moment. And it leaves you wondering, why did we need this entire history all the way up to this point? But you also appreciate that, it opens up storylines for the future. The writers do manage to introduce you to this world without relying too heavily on exposition, which I very much appreciated. Nothing is more boring than watching a character explain the world. I mean, it still happens. It's hard to create a history without, the history. You have 2 main plot lines that center around a singular need, the Sun Summoner. And then you have this minor plot line that enters in halfway through the story and has absolutely nothing to do with the central plot. I mean, nothing against Nina and Matthias, but what? Why the fuck do I care about either of you? Especially since neither of you are relevant until the last 30 seconds of the entire season. The entire story centers around our main heroic protagonist, Alina Starkov, the Sun Summoner. She's smart and intelligent and compassionate and potentially the savior of the entire world. She's also the least compelling character, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I like her well enough, but she always seems more dependent on everybody else around her than she is on standing on her own strength. You could argue that this is part of her hero's journey, learning to stand for herself, to depend on her own power. And maybe that's why I like the character of Baghra so much, because she's really kicking Alina's ass into being self-reliant. Part of her hesitancy is definitely created by this wariness and suspicion she has of other people. Alina's half Shu, so to anybody who doesn't know who she is, she looks like the enemy. She's discriminated against to a point where she doesn't want to stand out any more than she already does. But I found this aspect of her to be the most poignant part of her story. She's exactly the character that we need today. She faces gratuitous amounts of racism throughout her everyday life, and it's heartbreaking. It's sickening. Does it bother you? Good. Now do something about it, because this is exactly the kind of treatment that the East Asian and Southeast Asian communities are dealing with today. People are openly attacking Asian men and women, young and old, in the street for nothing more than walking. This series actually represents and reflects the reality of a diverse world, and it doesn't try to be colorblind and avoid topics and issues surrounding race like so many YA shows try to do. So many cultures come into play within this narrative. This is the future of YA and fantasy, a world that takes the time to explore the adversities that people face daily. But this isn't simply restricted to race, but also sexuality. We have at least one openly LGBT character in the show so far, the gunslinger, Jesper. His sexuality is presented as normal. It's part of who he is, his everyday life, and he has nothing to be ashamed of or hide. Sexuality isn't a big statement, that's just who he is, as it should be. He is the queer action hero that we have all been waiting for, like a smart, sexy, artful dodger. He is not second fiddle to anyone. He's a star. But we also have representation of disabilities, not just physical like Kaz, who definitely doesn't let him slow it down, but it is always there, it is always present. But we also have the mental health, like Jesper's very clear gambling addiction that interferes with his everyday life. And Inej is overcoming the trauma of her life. She may be a pious badass, but how do you overcome the trauma of literally being ripped away from your family and sold into slavery? Honestly, Jesper, Kaz, and Inej are the far more compelling characters in this series. I feel far more invested in them than I do in the main trio of Alina, Mal, and Kirigan. Because Kaz and his crew, they feel like a found family. A found family that's going to grow. But when it really comes down to it, the Chosen One storyline is just less compelling. I mean, I really do feel for Alina and Mal, and even Kirigan to a certain extent. How can you not with the isolation they endure? It's something that we all endure growing up. Being dragged out of the familiar and the comfortable and thrown into a world that you just don't understand, that you're the outsider. We all hate the isolation and the loneliness and the feeling of being a prisoner in our own adult life. Except in fiction, the character can just go out and change it. But I have to admit that I am super bored and over the heroic female character being stuck in a love triangle that will ultimately decide her fate. It's just tired and old. Either it's this mysterious stranger or her old friend. I get that it's YA, and there needs to be some sort of romantic subplot, and this one is a little better. I mean, you have a very young girl learning about manipulation, and that the bad boy, while probably the most attractive option, isn't necessarily the best one. But again, that's kind of cliche. I just like to see the everyday healthy growth of a relationship built on mutual trust and respect. Something that's hard-earned. Overall, Shadow and Bone has really set itself up to go places. Yeah, it starts off a little slow. And it's a little confusing for people being thrown right into it if they've never read any of the books like me. But it's definitely going to be a game changer. The writing is a bit weak, and they rely heavily on one-liners. Sometimes it can be awkward and a little melodramatic, which makes the delivery come across just weird, because they're trying to sound far more profound than they actually are. But while you have a show that hits all the typical YA tropes, like the tumultuous political world or the teen love triangle, you have a show that is genuinely trying to reshape fantasy and YA. The world design and aesthetic is spot on. It's intriguing in such a way that I genuinely want to see more. It's tough to create a fantasy world that doesn't look like a fantasy world. But the costuming and the special effects and the world building, it really helps bring it together. I can't wait to see more. I can't wait to see how they improve. I can't wait to see how the characters grow and change and evolve. And how they'll hopefully bring together all the different stories as they help reshape the world.
So, that went well.